Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today, and it's a big one.
Oh, absolutely.
We're tackling this documentary, Vigilantes Inc. And it's all about voter challenges and election integrity and all the stuff that keeps people up at night.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there for sure.
This film, it really digs into some potential threats to the 2024 election.
Yeah.
And it's got these surprising connections to some historical voter suppression tactics. It's pretty wild.
Well, that's what makes the documentary so fascinating, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it connects these modern day efforts to what was happening way back when, the Jim Crow era.
Oh, yeah.
It provides that historical context, and it's pretty stark.
So let's jump right into it, huh? The film really starts by zeroing in on Georgia's new voting law, SB 202.
Yeah, SB 202.
This has been all over the news, and I feel like this documentary is throwing fuel on the fire.
It really is, yeah.
So break it down for us. What's the deal with this law?
Well, SB 202 has this provision, right? And it basically allows any voter, anyone, to challenge, like, an unlimited number of other voters.
Really?
Yeah, they can challenge their eligibility to vote. And we're not just talking about a few isolated cases here. I mean, since this law was put into place, we've seen tens of thousands of voter challenges. It's insane.
That is a lot. Yeah, that's huge.
It's a big deal.
So the film, it highlights this one example, right? This woman, Pamela Reardon,
Right.
Republican committee woman.
Yeah.
She challenged 32,000 voters.
32,000, that's right.
And she did it without even talking to any of them.
You got it, not a single one.
That's so strange. Like, how is that even allowed?
Well, that's the question the documentary brings up, right? I mean, it makes you wonder, what's the intent behind these massive challenges? Are we talking about, legitimate concerns, or is there something else going on here,
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it gets even weirder, because when they asked her, about the KKK, like if she knew about them and how they used to suppress voters back in the day, she claimed she didn't even know what the KKK was.
Yeah.
She said she was from Canada.
It's that's a pretty surprising statement, especially given all the stuff we were just talking about.
Right, like all the parallels. That's just bizarre.
Yeah.
And these challenges, they're not just like abstract things. They have real-world consequences for voters.
Absolutely.
The film introduces us to this guy, Major Gale Turner. He's like this military expert. And his father was a civil rights leader. Imagine serving your country and then having your right to vote challenged.
It's really disheartening to see that.
It is. And the documentary does a great job of showing like the emotional toll all of this takes on people.
Yeah.
There's this other voter, Christine Jordan. She's been voting for decades. And she got flagged as ineligible, and she was talking about how it made her feel. Like she'd been disappeared. Like she wasn't even a person anymore. It's really powerful stuff.
Yeah, it really highlights the human impact of these policies.
It does. And speaking of powerful figures, I think we have to talk about Brian Kemp.
Of course, yeah.
Georgia's former Secretary of State. He's like a central character in all of this.
Yeah, he's a key figure for sure.
He was really pushing for these restrictive voting laws, right?
He's instrumental, yeah.
And the film goes into his history of purging voter rolls.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Remember back in 2018 when he was running for governor, he oversaw the removal of 34,000 voters.
Right.
They were deemed ineligible.
Wrongly deemed ineligible.
Right, and the documentary is saying he was using his position to kind of manipulate the system.
Yeah.
Maybe even influence the election.
It definitely raises questions about his motives.
It does, and let's not forget, he's got these ties to groups like True the Vote.
Yeah.
They're always pushing those voter fraud claims, often without much evidence.
Right.
So, I mean, what do you make of all this? Are Kemp's actions legit attempts to secure elections? Or are they, as some people say, a way to keep certain people from voting?
Well, that's the debate, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's a complicated issue with no easy answers.
And then the documentary, it goes on to talk about this film, 2,000 Mules.
Ah, yes.
That one made a lot of noise, with all those claims of voter fraud during the 2020 election, especially with the ballot drop boxes. Have you seen it?
I have.
What'd you think?
Well, it's interesting, right? They use all this geo-tracking data to try and prove that these mules, as they call them, were paid to illegally collect and deposit ballots.
Right, but I've heard some people say that data isn't very reliable.
That's the thing. The data's not precise. It can place a device within a certain area, but it can't say exactly where it was.
So you're saying these mules could have just been like mail carriers doing their jobs?
Well, that's one possibility the documentary brings up.
Wow.
I mean, think about it. Mail carriers go to lots of different locations every day.
Right, of course.
So it's not as clear cut as the film makes it seem.
So even though the methodology's been debunked, it still had a huge impact.
Right.
Right? Like it really got people thinking that something was wrong,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
especially those who were already unsure about the 2020 election.
Right. It just fueled that distrust in the system.
Speaking of fueling distrust, let's talk about True the Vote.
Ah, yes. The folks behind 2000 Mules.
They're front and center in this documentary.
They are.
They've been all over the place challenging voter registrations, and a lot of times it seems like they're going after voters in minority communities.
Yeah, that's a pattern that's been observed.
And they've got some serious financial backing, right? Like from wealthy donors.
Oh, yeah, big time. Like the Bradley Foundation.
Right, the Bradley Foundation.
They've been supporting True the Vote for a while now.
So they've got the money, and they're using technology like Eagle AI, this program that flags voters for challenges.
Yep, it's like they can challenge thousands of voters with a few clicks.
That's a lot of power. And it seems like a direct link back to what we were talking about with the Jim Crow era.
Well, that's the point the documentary is trying to make, right? It's like history's repeating itself.
So walk us through that connection. Like, how did they suppress black voters back then?
Well, they had all sorts of tactics. Some were really blatant,
Like what?
like violence, threats,
Oh, wow.
But they also had these more subtle things like literacy tests and poll taxes designed to make it harder for black people to vote.
And now it's like they've taken those old tactics and modernized them.
Yeah, you could say that.
Like they've digitized Jim Crow.
You did a way, yeah.
So what can we do about all of this? It can feel pretty overwhelming.
It can, but the film highlights the importance of knowing this history, recognizing what's happening.
Right.
Because if we don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it.
That's true. And the film does show us that there are people fighting back, right?
Absolutely. There are people and organizations who are working really hard to protect voting rights.
Like who?
Well, you've got folks like Stacey Abrams.
Oh, really?
And her organization, Fair Fight Action.
I've heard of them.
They've been doing amazing work challenging these laws and educating voters about their rights.
Right.
And there have been some important legal challenges, too.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, there was this lawsuit against Brian Kemp to try and get access to those voter purge files.
Interesting.
And that really helped to expose what he was doing, how many voters he was trying to remove from the rolls.
And on a more local level, are there things people are doing to fight back?
Oh, yeah. There are tons of grassroots organizations doing incredible work.
Like what?
They're educating voters, helping them register. They're encouraging people to get out and vote, They're really on the front lines of this battle for democracy.
So with all of this happening, what do you think the impact will be on the 2024 election? I mean, are you worried?
I am worried, yeah.
Really?
I mean, there's a real chance that all these challenges could cause chaos on Election Day.
Oh, no.
Think about it, Longer lines at the polls, confusion. It can make it really hard for people to vote.
Right.
And some people are even worried it could lead to attempts to overturn the election result.
That's a scary thought.
It is. It is. And that's why it's so important for us to be informed, to be vigilant, and to participate in the process.
So to wrap things up, what are the key takeaways from Vigilantes Inc. that you think our listeners should really remember?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that voter suppression is not a thing of the past. It's happening right now in all sorts of ways. Some are obvious, some are more subtle.
Right.
And the film really underscores how important it is to understand the history of all of this.
Right.
And to be vigilant in protecting our right to vote.
So it's a call to action.
Absolutely. We can't be complacent. Our democracy depends on it.
It's like we always say, you got to stay informed, you got to get out there and vote, you got to make your voice heard.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
That's what it's all about, right? Protecting our democracy.
That's the heart of it, for sure.
All right, so that was a lot to take in.
It was, yeah.
Vigilantes Inc. really lays out the challenges we're facing, but it also shows us that there's hope.
Oh, absolutely.
There are people fighting back, and we can all do our part.
We can, for sure.
Now, the film doesn't end there.
Yeah.
It goes on to tell some incredible stories about the fight for voting rights.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to dive into those in our next episode.
I'm looking forward to it.
Until then, stay engaged, stay informed, and stay vigilant.
And don't forget to vote.
You got it. We'll see you next time for part 2 of our deep dive into Vigilantes Inc.
See you then.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. So we're picking up where we left off, diving deeper into the stories Vigilantes Inc. brings to light.
Yeah, like we were saying last time, this film goes beyond just laying out the problems.
Right.
It introduces us to some incredible people who are on the front lines of this fight for voting rights, people like Joe Turner.
Ah, Joe Turner. His story is powerful.
It is, and it's a story that resonates so strongly with everything we've been talking about.
It does. It really does.
So for those who haven't seen the film, tell us about Joe Turner.
Well, Joe Turner was a black man who was denied his right to vote for years.
Years.
Years. And the film shows him, trying to register again and again.
Wow.
Facing all these obstacles. It's heartbreaking, and you can't help but see the connection to what's happening today.
Right, like those voters we talked about who are being challenged now.
Exactly. It's like a direct line from the past to the present.
So after all those years of being denied, did he ever get to vote?
He did. He finally cast his ballot.
It's amazing, the persistence.
It is. It really makes you think about the struggles people endure just to exercise their basic rights.
It does, and it makes the tactics being used today to suppress the vote all the more disheartening.
Absolutely. It underscores the importance of this fight.
So the film jumps forward in time then, right? To the story of Stacey Abrams.
Yes, Stacey Abrams, a modern-day champion for voting rights.
Right, and back in 2014, her organization, the New Georgia Project, they registered a ton of voters, like 89,000.
89,000, most of them young black students.
Wow, that's huge. But I'm guessing it wasn't that simple.
You guessed right, it wasn't.
What happened?
Well, somehow 40,000 of those newly registered voters.
40,000?
Yeah, they just vanished from the voter registry.
Vanished? Like, how does that even happen?
Well, that's what they wanted to know. So they went to the Secretary of State's office, which was run by, you guessed it, Brian Kemp.
Kemp, again, figures.
Right.
So, did he give him any answers?
Not quite. Instead of looking into the missing voters, he launched a criminal investigation.
What?
Yeah, he went after the New Georgia Project, accusing them of improperly registering voters.
Seriously. So instead of investigating why all those voters disappeared, he went after the people who registered them.
Yep, it's mind-boggling.
So what was the outcome of that investigation?
Well, the charges were eventually dropped, but the damage was done. 40,000 people missed the election.
It's just wrong.
It is. It highlights how those in power can use their authority to silence and intimidate, especially when it comes to expanding voting access.
And the film doesn't stop there, right?
Right.
It talks about this other group, 10,000 Koreans vote.
Yes, they were working to register Korean American voters in Georgia.
Makes sense. And was there a problem with that?
Well, they were using a pretty standard method. People filled out registration cards and they mailed them to the state.
Sounds straightforward enough.
Right. But when the group checked with Kemp's office to see if their voters were on the rolls, they hit a wall.
Oh, no.
And it gets worse. Kemp didn't just ignore them.
What did he do?
He sent the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, to raid their office.
A raid. Seriously.
Dead serious. They even threatened these elderly Korean Americans with prison sentences.
You're kidding? For helping people register to vote.
That was apparently the crime.
Unbelievable. So what happened to them?
The charges were thrown out, of course, but the message was clear. You try to mobilize minority voters, you're going to face intimidation.
Wow, and after that raid, what happened to 10,000 Koreans vote?
They were no more. That's how effective those scare tactics can be.
It's like we're going backwards, not forwards.
And it's not just Georgia. The film reveals that Kemp is pushing for even harsher penalties for groups like the New Georgia Project.
Really?
He wants to see their leaders behind bars for years for minor registration violations.
That's insane. This isn't about election integrity. This is about silencing dissent and holding on to power.
That's exactly what Vigilantes Inc. is trying to warn us about. It's not just about individual voter challenges.
Right.
It's about a system that's being manipulated to maintain control.
And the film doesn't just focus on Kemp, right?
Yeah.
It introduces us to Olivia Pearson.
Yes, Olivia Pearson, a city council member who comes from a family with deep roots in the civil rights movement.
Oh, wow.
Her mother was a leader in the NAACP, fighting for equality and justice.
And Olivia followed in her footsteps.
She did. She was the first black woman elected to the city council.
That's amazing.
But her commitment to her community made her a target.
How so?
Well, in 2016, Brian Kemp, using his power as head of the state election board, had her charged with a felony.
A felony?
Interfering with voters, she was facing 5 years in prison.
5 years? Just for helping people vote?
That's right. The case was about her assisting disabled voters who needed help filling out their ballots.
It's just wrong.
It was a clear attempt to take down a powerful black leader.
So, did she go to prison?
No, a jury found her not guilty.
Thank goodness.
It was obvious she was just trying to help people.
Right.
But the experience took a huge toll on her.
Oh, yeah.
She talked about the humiliation of being handcuffed, the fear, the trauma.
It's heartbreaking.
It is, but she didn't let it silence her. She's still fighting for voting rights.
Good for her. She's a true inspiration.
She is, and her story is a reminder that the fight for justice often comes with a personal cost.
So this wasn't just an isolated incident, right? The film shows that Kemp has used his power to silence others as well.
Right. The film points to an incident in Quitman, Georgia.
What happened in Quitman?
Well, the first black members were elected to the school board.
That's great.
It was, but Kemp, using his position as Secretary of State, had them arrested.
Arrested.
Right.
What were they charged with?
What else? Voter fraud?
Of course. Did he have any evidence?
None whatsoever. He accused them of stuffing ballot boxes.
But it was all made up.
Apparently so.
So what happened to them?
Well, he had them paraded in handcuffs and orange jumpsuits like they were hardened criminals.
Oh, my God.
Facing years in prison. It was a spectacle.
This is crazy. It sounds more like a police state than a democracy.
The impact on the community was devastating. These were educators, respected members of the community, and they were treated like criminals.
So were they convicted?
No. After 4 years of living under this cloud of suspicion, they were finally acquitted of all charges.
4 years. That's a long time.
It is. Imagine the toll that must have taken on them and their families.
I can't even imagine. And the film connects this incident to a really dark chapter in Quitman's history, the lynching of 12 black men back in 1918.
Yes, it draws that parallel, suggesting that the ghosts of the past are still haunting the present.
It's a chilling thought.
It is. It's a reminder that this history of racial violence and voter suppression is not just something that happened a long time ago.
Right.
It's still shaping our present.
We need to remember that.
We do, because if we don't learn from the past, we're doomed to repeat it.
And the film doesn't just focus on these individual stories, right? It also takes a closer look at Brian Kemp himself.
It does. It challenges the image he projects, the story he tells about himself.
What do you mean?
Well, Kemp likes to present himself as this self-made man, a hardworking, small businessman who pulled himself up by his bootstraps.
Right, the American dream kind of story.
Exactly. But the film digs deeper into his background, and it reveals a very different story. It suggests that Kemp's success is largely due to his family connections, their deep roots in Georgia's power structure.
So not so self-made after all.
Not really. His wealth and influence didn't come from hard work and grit. It came from generations of privilege.
And that privilege, the film suggests, is tied to some pretty dark chapters in Georgia's history.
That's right. The documentary explores Kemp's family history, tracing his lineage back to plantation owners who profited from the labor of enslaved Africans.
Wow, so the self-made man image is more myth than reality.
Pretty much, and the film goes even further, pointing to specific instances where Kemp used his position and connections to benefit himself and his allies.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. The documentary highlights Kemp's time on a local housing commission.
Okay.
He was involved in building multifamily housing units.
That sounds like a good thing.
It could have been, but instead of providing affordable housing to those in need, the film suggests that Kemp exploited loopholes in the system.
To do what?
To maximize his own profits.
So he was using public funds to line his own pockets.
That's the accusation, and the film also details how Kemp's family made a fortune by clearing land for development,
Okay.
often displacing black homeowners in the process.
So it's a pattern of using his power to benefit himself and his allies while pushing aside those who stand in his way.
That's the picture the film paints, and it raises serious questions about Kemp's motives and his commitment to serving all Georgians, not just those who benefit him politically and financially.
It's like this whole story has been carefully crafted to hide the true nature of his rise to power.
And Vigilantes Inc. pulls back the curtain, revealing the systems of power that have long benefited a select few at the expense of the many.
And it also points to the ways in which Kemp has tried to rewrite history to fit his own narrative. Right?
Exactly. The film debunks a claim he often makes about his family's supposed support for integration.
Right. He says his grandfather, a former state senator, voted to integrate the University of Georgia.
Yeah, he uses that story to paint himself as a champion of civil rights, someone who inherited a legacy of fighting for equality.
But that's not true.
Not according to Vigilantes Inc. They dug into the historical record, and they found that Kemp's grandfather actually supported a scheme to privatize public schools.
Which would have kept schools segregated.
Exactly. So the story Kemp tells about his family's support for integration is simply not true.
It's another example of how he manipulates the truth to serve his own political agenda.
And this manipulation of history is a recurring theme in the documentary.
Right.
It argues that the efforts to suppress voting rights are part of a larger campaign to erase the history of racial injustice in America.
To silence the voices of those who have been marginalized and oppressed.
Exactly.
And this effort to control the narrative extends beyond just history.
Absolutely. It's about controlling the present, shaping the way people see the world and their place in it.
And Vigilantes Inc. warns us that this control over information is a powerful tool that can be used to manipulate and control entire populations.
It's a call to be critical thinkers, to question the stories we're being told, and to seek out the truth.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
Even when it's uncomfortable, because the truth matters.
So we've talked a lot about Kemp in his efforts to suppress the vote.
We have.
But the documentary also explores the financial backing behind these efforts, right?
It does. It reveals the influence of wealthy donors and corporations.
Specifically, the Bradley Foundation.
Yes, the Bradley Foundation, a conservative philanthropic organization known for its support of right-wing causes.
And they're connected to all of this.
They are. The film reveals that the Bradley Foundation has been a major funder of True the Vote.
The organization behind 2,000 Mules and those mass voter challenges.
That's right.
So there's big money behind these efforts to restrict voting rights.
Absolutely. And the film argues that this financial backing allows these groups to operate on a national scale.
To coordinate their efforts to influence elections across the country.
Exactly. It's like a well-oiled machine fueled by dark money.
And the film also connects the Bradley Foundation to Cleta Mitchell.
Ah, yes, Cleta Mitchell.
The prominent conservative lawyer who was involved in Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election.
That's right. The same Cleta Mitchell who was on that infamous phone call with Trump when he pressured Georgia's Secretary of State to find him enough votes to win.
Oh, wow.
The film reveals that Mitchell is also a key figure in the push for more restrictive voting laws.
So it's not just about voter challenges. It's about a coordinated effort to undermine faith in the electoral process.
And to make it harder for certain people to vote.
It's a chilling picture.
It is.
And it raises a lot of questions about the future of our democracy.
It does, because if those in power are able to manipulate the rules of the game in their favor,
Right.
how can we ensure that the will of the people is actually reflected in our elections?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is. And Vigilantes Inc. argues that the answer lies in being aware of these tactics, speaking out against them, and fighting for a more just and equitable democracy.
Where everyone's voice is heard.
Exactly.
Now, the film also digs into this phrase, dead cat on the line.
Ah, yes, dead cat on the line.
It's a phrase that's often used to describe a situation where something isn't right, especially when it comes to voting.
Right.
So what's the story behind this phrase?
Well, the documentary traces it back to the Reconstruction era.
The period after the Civil War.
That's right, when Black Americans were finally granted citizenship and the right to vote.
But those rights were quickly threatened.
They were by white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan.
Who used violence and intimidation to keep Black people from voting.
Exactly, and during this era, it wasn't uncommon to find a dead cat.
A dead cat.
Or some other animal.
Oh, wow.
Left near a Black person's home as a warning.
It's horrible.
It was a way to instill fear and discourage them from voting.
So it was like a message, a threat.
A very clear threat, a reminder that their rights were constantly under threat.
And the phrase dead cat on the line became a way to describe that sense of unease, that suspicion.
That feeling that something wasn't right.
It's a phrase that's deeply rooted in the history of racial violence and voter suppression.
It is, and the documentary argues that this phrase is still relevant today.
As we see these new efforts to disenfranchise voters of color,
the tactics may have evolved, but the goal remains the same.
To maintain white supremacy and control over the levers of power.
That's the chilling reality.
And one of the most disturbing aspects of this new wave of voter suppression is the use of fear and intimidation, right?
Absolutely. The documentary highlights how armed vigilantes are showing up at polling places.
Really?
Monitoring voters, even following people home.
That's scary.
It is, and this tactic is straight out of the Jim Crow playbook.
During that era, white supremacist groups often used violence and intimidation to keep Black people from voting.
They would threaten them, beat them, even kill them.
It's like they're trying to recreate that atmosphere of fear and terror.
Exactly, and it's especially concerning because we're seeing this rise in vigilante activity alongside a surge in gun ownership.
And a growing acceptance of political violence.
It's a dangerous combination.
The documentary actually interviews some of these vigilantes.
It does.
And they seem to believe that they're protecting the integrity of the election.
They do. They see themselves as patriots, as defenders of democracy.
But their actions are based on this distorted view of reality.
Fueled by misinformation and conspiracy theories.
They believe that the election was stolen, that there's widespread voter fraud.
And that they need to take matters into their own hands.
This is the danger of the big lie.
The false claim that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump.
It's been repeated so often that millions of people now believe it.
And it's created a climate where violence and intimidation are seen as justified.
And this climate of fear is having a real impact on voters.
Especially in communities of color.
The film interviews voters who are afraid to go to the polls.
Because they fear being harassed or even attacked.
It's a way to silence dissenting voices.
And maintain control, a direct attack on the foundations of our democracy.
So the film also exposes the role of money in all of this.
Yes, it traces the flow of funds from wealthy donors to organizations like True the Vote,
who then use those funds to launch mass voter challenges and spread disinformation.
It's like a dark money pipeline pumping poison into our political system.
And it raises serious concerns about the influence of wealth and power in our democracy.
It does, because if those with the most money are able to manipulate the rules,
Right.
How can we ensure a level playing field for everyone?
That's a big question.
It is, and Vigilantes Inc. challenges us to demand greater transparency in campaign finance.
To expose the dark money networks.
And to fight for a system where everyone has an equal voice.
Regardless of their wealth or status.
Exactly.
It's important to remember that these efforts to suppress voting rights are not just a partisan issue.
They're an attack on the fundamental principles of democracy.
The right to vote is the cornerstone of any functioning democracy.
And when that right is threatened, it threatens the very fabric of our society.
And the film is urging us to do everything we can to protect this.
Right? Not just for ourselves.
But for future generations.
If we allow these anti-democratic forces to succeed, it will have dire consequences.
For our country and for the world.
The stakes are high.
So the film doesn't just focus on the problems, right?
No, it doesn't.
It also highlights the people and organizations that are fighting back.
It showcases the lawyers who are challenging these laws in court.
The activists who are mobilizing voters.
The everyday citizens who are demanding change.
It's a testament to the power of collective action.
And the resilience of the human spirit.
It gives us hope.
It does. It shows us that even in the face of adversity, we can overcome these challenges.
And create a more just and equitable democracy.
That's the goal.
So the film also explores the use of technology in all of this.
Yes, it shows how technology can be used to both suppress and protect voting rights.
Give us an example.
Well, on the one hand, you have tools like Eagle AI, which are being used to automate voter challenges.
To make it easier to target and disenfranchise voters.
Exactly. But on the other hand,
Right.
technology can also be used to empower voters.
How so?
By providing them with information about their rights.
Right.
Making it easier for them to register and vote.
So technology is a double-edged sword.
It is. And it's up to us to ensure that it's used for good.
And this brings us to another important theme in the documentary. The battle over the narrative.
The fight to control the story of America?
Vigilantes Inc. argues that those who seek to restrict voting rights are also seeking to rewrite history.
To erase the legacy of racial injustice.
And to silence the voices of those who have been marginalized and oppressed.
It's a call to reclaim the narrative.
To tell the truth about our past.
And to fight for a more just and equitable future.
The film also puts a human face on this issue.
It does, by sharing the personal stories of those who have been impacted by voter suppression.
It highlights the fear.
The anger.
The determination of those who are fighting back.
It reminds us that these are not just abstract political debates.
These are real lives being affected.
Real people being denied their fundamental rights.
And it underscores the importance of empathy and compassion in the fight for justice.
We need to see each other.
Hear each other's stories.
And stand together in solidarity.
Now, the film also digs into Brian Kemp's family history even further.
It does. It reveals his connections to the Roswell Mills.
The Roswell Mills.
A manufacturing hub that played a significant role in the Confederate war effort.
Wow.
Kemp's ancestors were involved in producing the gray uniforms worn by Confederate soldiers.
That's a direct link to the Confederacy.
It is, and it's a reminder of the deep roots of white supremacy in this country.
And the ongoing struggle to dismantle those systems of oppression.
The documentary argues that Kemp's actions as Secretary of State are part of a larger effort to roll back the gains of the civil rights movement.
To maintain white control over the levers of power.
It challenges us to confront the legacy of racism and white supremacy in our own time.
And to fight for a more just and equitable future for all Americans.
It's a sobering reminder that the fight for justice is far from over.
The film also reveals Kemp's involvement in a company called Plantation Partners, LLC.
Plantation Partners.
They own a lot of forest land in Georgia.
They do, and the documentary details how Kemp's family has profited from the timber industry.
Often at the expense of the environment and local communities.
The film draws a parallel between the exploitation of the land and the exploitation of people.
Both rooted in a system of greed and power.
That prioritizes profit over people and the planet.
And it suggests that Kemp's efforts to restrict voting rights are part of a larger agenda.
To maintain the status quo.
To protect the interests of the wealthy and powerful.
And to silence the voices of those who are demanding change.
It challenges us to connect the dots.
To see the interconnectedness of these issues.
And to fight for a more just and sustainable future for all.
The documentary also explores the historical roots of Georgia's plantation system.
Tracing it back to James Habersham.
The first governor of Georgia.
And an ancestor of Brian Kemp.
Habersham was a key figure in the establishment of slavery in Georgia.
And his family amassed a fortune through the exploitation of enslaved Africans.
The film details the horrific conditions on these plantations.
The brutality of the slave trade.
The lasting legacy of this system of oppression.
It's a powerful reminder of the dark side of American history.
And it challenges us to grapple with the ongoing impact of slavery and racism in our own time.
The film also explores the resistance to slavery.
Highlighting the efforts of those who fought for abolition and emancipation.
And it connects this historical struggle to the ongoing fight for racial justice and equality.
Arguing that the work of dismantling systems of oppression is never truly finished.
It's a call to remember the past.
To honor those who fought for freedom.
And to continue the work of building a more just and equitable society.
The film features a poignant interview with Griffin Lotson.
Who is Griffin Lotson?
He's a descendant of slaves who were sold at the largest auction of humans in American history.
Wow, what was that called?
The Weeping Time.
The Weeping Time. That's a haunting name.
It is, and Lotson shares his family's story.
The pain of separation.
The loss of identity.
The enduring legacy of trauma that's been passed down through generations.
He emphasizes the importance of remembering this history.
Of preserving the stories of those who were enslaved.
And of honoring their resilience and strength.
It's a powerful reminder of the human cost of slavery.
And the ongoing struggle for healing and reconciliation.
The documentary also explores the cultural traditions of the Gullah Geechee people.
The descendants of enslaved Africans who lived on the coastal islands of Georgia and South Carolina.
And Griffin Lotson is a member of this community.
He is, and he shares the rich history of his culture.
The language.
The music.
The spiritual traditions that have been passed down through generations.
He emphasizes the importance of preserving this cultural heritage.
Not just for the Gullah Geechee people.
But for all Americans.
It's a reminder of the diversity and resilience of American culture.
And it challenges us to embrace and celebrate the contributions of all people.
Regardless of their background or history.
Exactly.
So the film also touches on the role of religion in all of this.
It does. It explores how Christianity was used to justify slavery.
And to maintain white supremacy.
But it also shows how faith has been a source of strength and resistance for those fighting for justice.
It raises important questions about the role of religion in society.
And the need for a faith that is rooted in love, compassion, and a commitment to justice for all.
The film also explores the impact of those divisive concept laws that are being passed in states across the country.
The laws that restrict the teaching of certain concepts related to race and history in schools.
They're often framed as attempts to prevent the indoctrination of children.
But Vigilantes Inc. argues that they're actually designed to whitewash history.
To silence dissenting voices.
And to prevent honest conversations about race and racism in America.
It highlights the importance of education as a tool for social change.
We need to teach our children the truth about our history.
Both the good and the bad.
In order to create a more just and equitable future.
And the documentary really underscores the importance of truth and accountability.
It argues that we can't move forward as a nation until we confront the injustices of the past and present.
It challenges us to be truth tellers.
To speak out against injustice.
And to hold those in power accountable for their actions.
It reminds us that the fight for justice is a marathon, not a sprint.
It requires persistence, courage, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of a better world.
And Vigilantes Inc. leaves us with a sense of hope.
A belief that even in the face of overwhelming odds, Ordinary people can make a difference.
It's a call to action.
A reminder that the future of our democracy is in our hands.
And that if we stand together, we can overcome the forces of darkness and create a world where everyone is free and equal. You know, we talked about the impact of misinformation last time.
Yeah, it's scary how easily people can be swayed by it.
It is.
It's like we're living in this world where facts don't even matter anymore.
Well, facts do matter.
Well,
But it's definitely a challenge. People are bombarded with so much information these days.
it's overwhelming.
It is. And it's hard to know what to believe.
Exactly. And Vigilantes Inc. reminds us that we can't just sit back and hope for the best.
We can't.
We need to actively engage, be critical thinkers, and hold those in power accountable.
Absolutely. We can't be passive observers.
But the film does a good job of showing us that there's hope.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It highlights the solutions, the people and organizations that are fighting back.
It does. And it's inspiring to see their dedication.
It is. It gives you hope that maybe we can turn things around.
It does. It shows that people are not giving up.
So who are some of the people the film highlights?
Well, they interview lawyers who are challenging these restrictive voting laws in court.
So they're fighting back through the legal system.
Exactly. They're using the courts to try to protect voting rights.
And what about on the ground? Are there people working to mobilize voters?
Absolutely. There are tons of activists working tirelessly to get people registered and educated about their rights.
It's a true grassroots movement.
It is, and the film emphasizes that we don't have to be lawyers or activists to make a difference.
So what can the average person do?
Stay informed, talk to your friends and family about these issues, and most importantly, vote.
Every vote counts.
It does, every single one.
So Vigilantes Inc. is a call to action.
It is. It's a reminder that we can't take our democracy for granted.
We have to fight for it, protect it, and nurture it.
And that's something we can all do.
The future of our democracy depends on each and every one of us.
So to our listener, we ask you, what role will you play in this fight?
What actions will you take to ensure that your voice is heard and your vote is counted?
The future of our democracy depends on it.
That's it for our deep dive into Vigilantes Inc.
It's been a heavy topic.
It has, but an incredibly important one.
We hope this conversation has given you some food for thought.
And maybe even inspired you to take action.
Because the fight for democracy is ongoing.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
And it's a fight we must win.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
And remember, stay engaged, stay informed, and most importantly, stay vigilant.
We'll see you next time.